with that, we'll just walk through our itinerary a little bit. We arrive on the Sunday, the evening of Sunday, May 26th in Hong Kong. And we start bright and early the next morning on Monday the 27th with the Hong Kong Trade Development Council. They're another one of our hosts. Erin is passing out the itineraries now so you can follow along. We'll also meet with the planning department of the Hong Kong government, have lunch, and then we're going to be meeting with the Sino group and touring a couple of their developments. We're touring the cage homes that we just saw, and then finally we'll be touring Victoria Peak as well as Temple Street Night Market. So first, this is a hotel you're going to check into, by the way. This is the Intercontinental Hong Kong. Richard is smiling. This is, in my opinion, one of the best hotels in the world. They're supposed to renovate. They're supposed to be closed right now for renovation, but they didn't for whatever reason. And whenever they do renovate and reopen, I think this will be the best city hotel in the world. I mean, this has got to be the best view of any hotel anywhere in the world. And you can enjoy it right from the lobby here. As you can see, it's just stunning. This picture is spectacular. Doesn't do it justice. This is where the Hong Kong Trade Development Council is located. It's in the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Center, which is this bird thing in Wan Chai. So you can see it's on reclaimed land. This is the planning department. So one thing that we can talk about with the planning department, remember Ivanhoe was talking about land reclamation to build some of those 450,000 new homes? So they're actually proposing to build new islands, 4 new islands, to build tens of thousands of new units, which I think is, I mean, it's radical and extreme, but it's kind of amazing to me that they would think that that is a preferable alternative to like paving over some of the, agricultural land in new territories, for instance. I don't even know that in Hawaii we would, I mean, land reclamation in Hawaii would be totally unthinkable, right? So,
right, the reef runway is like the closest thing you have.
Yeah. Well, actually, a lot of Hawaii has been reclaimed, believe it or not.
Yeah, that's true. But reclaimed land usually takes like 30 years to settle out.
Yeah, so
build on it.
Great point. So you know what they do in Singapore is they put like a golf course on it for 30 years, and then they develop it. Okay, the Sino Group. So this is one of their shopping centers that we'll be touring. It's in a development called Olympian City, which is one of those TOD developments with MTR that was referenced earlier. And this is, if we have time, and I hope we do, this is their luxury development, the Hermitage, which hopefully we'll be able to tour one of the units of. So you'll get to see what luxury development looks like in Hong Kong.
How tall is that building?
Oh, I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
60, 70?
Yeah, maybe. And this is also on reclaimed land, by the way. Okay, so this is very special. I think it's extremely eye-opening. We're gonna go with the Society for Community Organization. It's an NGO in Hong Kong. And we'll be touring some of the cage homes in Sham Shui Po, which is one of the neighborhoods with the highest densities of these cage homes. It's one of the poorest neighborhoods in Hong Kong. And it is estimated that 200,000 people live in these cage homes. Which, I mean, to us, these look like a human rights violation. I mean, I certainly think this is a human rights violation. But keep in mind, as Ivanhoe said earlier, the wait list to get public housing in Hong Kong is 5.5 years. And that's a long time. But in Hawaii, it takes an average of 10 years to get a Section 8 voucher. In LA, I was visiting their public housing authority, they take 15 years. And if you're on the DHHL wait list, if you're a native Hawaiian, that takes 20 or even 30 years. So these people are actually probably on the wait list for public housing, and they probably will get there, in 5 years or so. And remember, Ivanhoe was saying that these guys go to the front of the line on the wait list.
Also, when I first got here, I had to keep things in storage because I was living in a hotel room for a while, and there are people living in the storage units. And I'm not so sure that living in a storage unit is that different than that. Much more spacious.
Yeah, and you're not the first person who's told me that actually what we have in Hawaii is not too far off from this existing. We have boarding houses, we have some illegally subdivided homes as well. It's really bad. But I want everyone to see this because this is the ghost of Christmas future. If we do nothing, we will get this. That's just a fact, right? So Hong Kong, they have this, and they've had this for years. This is not a new phenomenon. I mean, Hong Kong housing has been outrageously expensive as long as I've been alive. They've had a housing shortage as long as as long as Hawaii's had a housing shortage.
Since 1960.
Yeah. Okay, so after that, we're going to have a little bit of a break in the afternoon, siesta, and then we're going to have a tour. We're going to be taking the Star Ferry across the water to Hong Kong. We'll be visiting. This is the view from Victoria Peak. This is a classic view of Hong Kong that you'll get. So our hotel will be on the other side of the water. This one, I think, and then it's looking at the front view of the buildings from Victoria's Peak. You'll see the back of the buildings. And the peak is the same peak on which that $446 million home is located. This is the most desirable residential neighborhood in after that, we're going to take you guys to the Temple Street Night Market, one of the very famous night markets of Mongkok in Kowloon. And this is where you can bargain for knockoff merchandise and whatever little electronic gadgets right on the street. And this is kind of the more traditional Hong Kong. All right, the next morning we're going to start with the Hong Kong Housing Authority briefing. They're going to take us to one of the public housing estates. I think this is one of the new fancy ones. We're going to have lunch at a shopping center called Popcorn, which is brand new. And then we'll be visiting the Tsung Kwan O Lohas Park developments. These are the new developments that MTR Corporation is doing. And then finally we'll have a sit-down briefing with the property director of MTR. So we'll get to talk to MTR, which is their subway corporation, their public transportation corporation, to talk about their rail plus property model. So this is the Hong Kong Housing Authority. This is the ONTAT Public Housing Estate. So, this scale of the tall buildings is really a Hong Kong thing. As you guys, I don't know if you guys detected this, but the pinnacle at Duxton, which is the 750-story towers in Singapore, that's kind of based on the Hong Kong model, but actually most Singaporean public housing is not like that. And I think the reason why the Singaporeans haven't gone more with this model is because, remember, they have that social engineering aspect that they're trying to achieve, racial harmony, which in Hong Kong, pretty much everyone's Chinese, so they don't have the same racial tension issues.
So they do have some good public housing examples,
In Hong Kong.
as well as some of the worst.
Yeah, and this is one of the nice ones, I think. And then, so we'll be touring this one.
Well, they have a Hong Kong mainland Chinese tension.
Yeah, that's true. So that's actually another question, maybe Richard can talk about that, which is, a question that I always get is, isn't Hong Kong just part of China? No, it is not. It is and it isn't. It's very different from mainland China. And the people there are extremely proud to not be mainland Chinese.
We don't need a Chinese visa as well, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's part of that 50-year thing. So we Americans still have visa-free access to Hong Kong. This is the Popcorn Shopping Center, like I said, brand new. And this is the Tsung Kwan O area. At least part of this was a former landfill. As you can see, it's the latest and greatest new development out in the new territories. And this is the town center of that development. And this is the Lohas Park, currently under construction. So I don't know how much of Lohas Park we'll get to see, maybe just from the outside. I know some of these buildings are currently already occupied, so maybe we'll get to walk around it. By the way, part of me said don't take the delegation here, right? Because if I show you this picture, right, I can guarantee you that 85% of the voters of Hawaii will say absolutely not to this, under no circumstances to this, right? But it is a model, and we should take a look at it and see what we can learn, both good and bad, from it. Okay, MTR, this is another example of an MTR public housing, not public housing, but a TOD development in Kowloon. As you can see, it's very nice. These are like 80-story buildings.
How did they fund them?
So remember what the guy was saying? So initially, MTR was a government entity. It was like HART, 100% government owned. And the government, which owns all the land in Hong Kong, and they've just had that, I think, mostly by fiat. They just gave land to MTR and said, all right, you build your transit lines through these lands and you develop them, or you hire a private sector entity to develop them for you. And that's what happened. And so that's like this. Right, where the government said, we'll reclaim the land and you can develop it or whatever. But now the government hasn't given MTR any free land since it became a publicly traded corporation, and so it has to bid in that market just like everyone else, like that $2.2 billion, lease that we saw earlier.
So just to clarify, the developers paid for the rail? Or
The
no?
rail, well,
No.
it's the rail company develops and operates a rail. It builds rails and then develops the land around the stations. That's a
Right.
better.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so you
Yeah.
might have like let a developer put up something in exchange for building part of the rail, perhaps.
No, or it would just, the government would, the developer would pay them a bunch of money to lease for the air rights, to lease the lands around the rail stations.
So the government was no longer paying for the rail?
Today,
No, in Hong Kong.
She wants to know if they pay for the construction.
well, they gave free land. Is that paying for rail?
Oh, I guess it is, yeah, because their land
The land is
prices are so
valuable,
high.
right?
So that was how they paid for it.
Right,
And they did a trade. So
Right.
we'll give you the land for free if you build it.
right. But remember two things. They made money off their property development. Their property development was profitable. And number two, their rail is also profitable. So in the
Oh,
bus,
the company that's the private entity right here.
yeah. So the operations of the bus, your fare it pays only 30%, give or take, the cost to operate the bus. In Hong Kong, your fare alone pays for 200% of the operations of their train. So they make a profit just on the operations, but the big money is in the development. But they also make money on the operations.
And the commercial space.
And their commercial space. Like you walk around these train stations, which we'll see, I think. Well, I don't have a picture of it, but you'll walk around the train stations, you'll see incredible amounts of commercial space and that kind of thing. All right. This is Wednesday the 29th. This is our free day, so you guys have been working pretty hard in Singapore and in Hong Kong. You have a completely free day. We have a farewell dinner in the evening in the village of Sai Kung. This is one of the original fishing village type communities that still exists in Hong Kong. And this is one of the restaurants. I think this one it had a Michelin star at one point. But it's going to be very much a traditional Hong Kong style restaurant. I think we have a private room though. And here you can see, they have all the tanks of live seafood. What you can do is you can actually point to what you want, and they'll take it into the back and cook it for you, which is pretty cool. You can actually even buy the live seafood off the boats, the fishing boats that are out in the Sai Kung Harbor. All right, and this is our last day. Right before our departure, we're going to be doing a briefing at Hong Kong Airport and also doing a tour of their integrated airport center, which I guess is their control center, and we're also touring their airfield. I don't know if that means we get to go actually onto the runway itself, but that would be pretty cool, onto the tarmac. So, like I said, I'm really interested in airports. I still think Hong Kong is the best in the world. We're going to be taking the Airport Express, which is a super fast, dedicated train line that goes from Hong Kong Island to Kowloon and then directly to the airport. And it's super fast, it's super efficient, it is dedicated, and it's not expensive, and you can check in town, you can check your bags in town, and you can have the rest of the day at your leisure, and then you walk onto the train, you get to the airport in 24 minutes exactly. There's a little countdown thing that you can watch, and it's incredible. Now, I don't think Hawaii will be able to achieve this, but it shows you what you can. So I want you guys to, well, it's too bad we're not going to see the old buildings in Changi Airport, but Changi Airport is actually like a bunch of like kind of plain white boxes from the 70s that they just gussied, they threw in every bell and whistle imaginable, orchid gardens and movie theaters and food and beverage, crazy food and beverage. But in Hong Kong, with just a completely new shell, they've made an incredible experience. It's one of my favorite buildings in the world. All right, this doesn't even exist yet. This is the Sky City development that's going to go outside right next to the current airport. And this is what it's going to look like on the inside. So I'm sure they'll be telling us about the Sky City. All right, so that's it from me. I'll take questions. And then our next speaker will be Dr. Richard Wilczek. So any questions? Sorry, actually, is it him or is it the briefing one first?
No.
That's him, okay. All right. Yes.
Do you have an overall plan of what you want to learn or you want us to learn, or what conclusions that you think we'll get from all of this? And I don't know, maybe you let everybody know already, but I haven't seen that, and I was thinking it would be good to see what we want to learn, or what conclusions you think we should achieve, so that as we go to these places, we ask about them, or we're skeptical about those. Because the goal is you want a solution that's going to be saleable next session, the legislature saleable to the community, right?
Okay.
So I'm just looking for some,
Still okay.
rather than just
I'll do the next one for
walk
sure.
around to these places and see things or hear people. I like to get an idea of,
Tell us what you want us to learn from every
Yeah,
place,
yeah,
like
yeah.
what the takeaway should be
Yeah.
from every visit, that kind of
yeah.
thing.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Okay, and there are several things that I want you guys to learn. All right, in Singapore, I primarily want people to understand the Singapore model. Okay, because I've been telling people I spend like 90+% of my time explaining non-American concepts to Americans. Right, so people are like, well, what happens after 99 years? And I have to explain, well, it's okay because, so on and so on. Or people say, wait, you can resell those units into the secondary market and make a profit? And I'm like, well, that's okay because blah, 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 blah. Or, people say, well, we need, we have to reserve public housing for poor people. We have to put income caps on it. And, I'm like, no, we don't. We don't need income caps. We should have them available to the rich and poor alike, right? So I want you guys to walk away from Singapore saying, oh, yeah, we can do that. Like, that is possible. I have now seen people living happily in 99-year leases. They're not concerned about passing down the home to like their great-grandkids or whatever. Right? Oh, I can see that people are comfortable living in very high-density condos. Oh, I can see that people are, the secondary market, I can see that works, right? I can see that people are actually, that it works, that it's not just going to be immediate. All of this is, that the development actually can keep up with demand. Like, just like the fact that it works, it exists. It is not just a pipe dream, right? It exists in the world.
Just because we don't have it doesn't mean
Right,
it's
right,
impossible.
exactly. Just because we are in a supply shortage doesn't mean that it's impossible for us to solve that supply shortage. Okay, that's what I want you guys to learn in Singapore. In Hong Kong, I want you guys to learn a couple of different things. Number one, I think that Hong Kong's Kowloon is fantastic, and I want more people to sort of understand and these are kind of the new trends in urban planning. High density, narrow streets and sidewalks, ground floor commercial and retail, and no setbacks. I want people to see that and say, oh, okay, I can see how this works. And I want you guys to be critical, of these principles as well. I also want you guys to see that, the ghost of Christmas future. What happens if we do nothing, right? If we continue to do nothing, it will only get worse, and we too will have people living in storage units or in cages, and I want people to deeply understand that doing nothing is not an option, right? Critics of the Hong Kong government, well, so I think we can see that in Singapore they do care about the middle class, right? They want the middle class. They're very paternalistic. They're forcing the middle class to save to buy a home for their retirement, for healthcare. They're very paternalistic, and they force people to save, and they care about people's outcomes. In Hong Kong, do they care about people's outcomes if they're okay with letting 200,000 people live in cages?
It's the freest market in the world.
It's the freest market in the world, right? And they care more about that, right? And the ability of the big corporations and the wealthy tycoons that are bidding on their land auctions to be able to make a profit and so on than the 200,000 cage home dwellers. Maybe they don't say that, but clearly these situations exist. So that's kind of what I want people to see in Hong Kong, and that's just my perspective. So someone asked me this also at last week's briefing. At all of these meetings, we have time. Okay, ask tough questions. Can you really sell these units for $180,000? Where are the government subsidies? It's free land, but are you also giving them free infrastructure? Are you also giving them preferential this or that, right? Or what would happen if the neighbors really dislike this new development? Are they allowed to protest? Are they allowed to litigate? Can they force the government to do an EIS? You know, whatever, right? Ask the hard questions, because actually these are both pretty much authoritarian systems, and there's a lot that cannot be copied in Hawaii. And my proposal, I think, is actually, it deviates quite a bit from the Singaporean model. But I'm not the only, I don't think I'm that smart. You know, I copied someone else's homework, and that homework was out in plain sight for everyone to see since the 1960s. So I do think it is important that you actually have to see it and believe it, because I don't think that I'm that smart, but I do think that I was maybe the first person to actually visit Singapore and see how they did it. I don't know that anyone actually did that over all these decades.
So have you been to the Singapore Tenement Museum?
No.
It's in Chinatown, and it's quite extraordinary. It shows what life was like in the 1950s in environments that were not so different from the Hong Kong cage environments, and they've made extraordinary. I mean, I look at it, and it looks like something from the 1850s in London, but it was the 1950s in Singapore. It's a museum that's anybody that's got extra time in Singapore and is interested in this stuff, it's well worth a visit to that. The tenements in Chinatown and Singapore, not very long ago, were really, really grim.
And there were huge fires. You know, there were riots.
They don't even talk about that. They just show what day-to-day life was like.
Yeah.
And it's been an extraordinary transition for Singapore.
And it was not different in Hong Kong either. Hong Kong had the shanties until like our lifetimes, until like the 1980s. There were still shanties in Hong Kong.
We watched the Jackie Chan movie. Police. Go through the little houses, yeah.
Do you think Singapore would have been as successful if they just had a strict democracy as opposed to having a benevolent dictator?
So that's an interesting question, because actually, if you ask the Singaporeans which is more democratic, they'll say Singapore. If you ask the Hong Kongers which is more democratic, they'll say Hong Kong. Hong Kong has freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly. Singapore does not. Right? So the current Prime Minister of Singapore is the son of the previous Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew. If you say that is a dynasty, as the Wall Street Journal said, that is defamation. And they were taken to court, they had to pay a huge fine. So I don't know what a dynasty is, but apparently a father and a son is not a dynasty in Singapore. Okay, so they don't have freedom of the press, but they do have elections. Okay, and the people of Singapore in any of these elections are free to vote for opposition parties, and they have voted for opposition parties, and there are opposition parties in the Singaporean legislature. And if they get a majority, then PAP will no longer be the majority party, and then the opposition will take over, right? And that is at least theoretically possible in Singapore, right? Now they are heavy-handed too, right? They see which way, we have precincts, they see which way each building votes, and they say the buildings that vote with us, we're gonna upgrade their elevators, we're gonna upgrade their bathrooms. If you don't vote with us, it's too bad. So they can be very heavy-handed, but at least the people have the theoretical option of voting in a new government, right? Hong Kong is not a democracy. They have a legislature called the Legislative Council. Some of them are directly elected from districts like we have in America. A lot of them are appointed by Beijing, and a lot of them are appointed by functional constituencies, which is very interesting. They have, say, the teachers will all get together and elect representatives. The lawyers, the legal profession will get together and elect representatives. Sports, arts, culture will get together and elect representatives. And so they tend to be pro-Beijing because, just like trade groups in the United States, right, tend to be pro-government, because they have to work with the government. That's one indirect way in which the government has control. But the direct way is, of course, the government approves the candidates for chief executive. So you can vote for whomever, like everyone can vote, but only for the hand-picked candidates of Beijing. So that's an issue. So which is more democratic? I don't know. I mean, neither of them is really that democratic.
Help us know, are there things that are inappropriate or would not be politically acceptable to do or say as we're involved in these government meetings in Singapore and Hong Kong?
Well, I think we'll have a lot of leeway because we're Americans. But in Singapore, as in the US, it's not that politically correct to talk about the racial tension. Right? Even though it kind of, in my opinion, it underlies everything in Singapore. It's the reason for everything in Singapore, including its existence as an independent nation. In Hong Kong, it's not, especially with the government, you have to tread a fine line when you're criticizing Beijing. You know, Beijing wants to, you know, they do all kinds of things, right? Right now they wanted to do patriotic education, where they, you know, had textbooks about how great, you know, the communist government is, and the people of Hong Kong were not happy about that. Or, you know, Beijing doesn't want to allow the people of Hong Kong to nominate their candidates for chief executive or for the legislative council or whatever, right? And so that's not that, you know, so it's kind of like this, you know, they have to walk a thin, like a fine line.
Don't criticize the government, no dynasty.
Oh yeah, I mean, and in Singapore, I mean, in Hong Kong you have a little bit more freedom, but in Singapore, obviously, you don't want to, I mean, don't even think about drugs, you know, don't even think about like, you know, like chewing, spitting, littering, you know, urinating in a elevator. I mean, like, I know you wouldn't anyway, but like, it's.
Right. Crepes our style.
Yeah, it's like in Singapore, you gotta follow along. But you know, and you know, if you say that the Lee family is a dynasty, you know that I bet you the government officials they would bristle, right? Or if you say that that they don't have freedom of speech, they would probably bristle.
But questions are okay, they're apropos to affordable housing.
Yeah. But you know, I mean,
They probably will figure out a very Asian way to not answer your question.
If they want to.
yeah, but you know, I mean, I think that they should be held accountable, right? I mean, if you have a question about like, you know, I mean, I asked them, so what happens if if the neighbors object to a new development and they say, well, you know, too bad, yeah. I mean, and I say, well, what if they protest? Well, protests are illegal. What if they sue the government? Well, you know, the courts are never going to go with the plaintiff. You know, they're always going to fight for the government. All right.
I'll send you McNuts in jail, Ella.
Oh yeah, so sweet.
All right. Okay, maybe we'll take a couple of last questions. All right, go ahead.
Or just like connected to this like amount of government control. A friend of mine in Singapore was saying, he was complaining, he's like, well, I'm gonna sell my house, we have another kid, we wanna move in a bigger house. But I'm sad because I wanna sell to a Chinese person, they have more money. But the government says I can only sell to a Malaysian person because of the quotas.
Right.
So he's like, I'm bummed out, they're forcing me to sell to a lower bidder.
Yeah. But
Which is like in this country would be so crazy to think about, right?
But isn't that interesting? They automatically assume that the Malay is going to be the lower bidder.
I mean, that's how it is here. They automatically assume that the Chinese is wrong.
It's true. All right.
So we talked a little bit about thinking about what the conclusions might be, or at least being observant and being critical. What is your next step? We do these tours. We talk about them. We reach some conclusions together. I'm assuming one of those next steps is legislation in Hawaii. But is there? You mentioned that you were one of the first to get to Singapore and kind of pay attention to this. Does the outcome of what we're doing, does that need to get out there to the world, and should we be thinking about that too and how that happens?
Absolutely, 100%. So we have a bill in the legislature, and I mean, right now, this past session got converted into a study. So it passed out of the legislature. It'll give $150,000 to Craig and his agency to do a study of the Singaporean model. And so we'll see what comes of that and make recommendations for legislation. But I just feel like it's one of the stumbling blocks that I have is that it's just, people don't, it's inconceivable to them that the government could build tons of housing, sell it to rich and poor alike with no public subsidy, no taxpayer subsidy, do the 99-year thing. I mean, it's just mind-blowing. You know, I'll give you an example. Like the Native Hawaiian groups, OHA and so forth, will come in and say, you know, we want priority, right? Because there's going to be a limited supply, we want priority. Okay, last week in Singapore, there is no wait list in Singapore.
Wow.
Right? Anyone who can afford one can move in tomorrow. Right? And so I tell them, look, you don't need priority because everyone will be able to get housing right away. What's the point of having priority if everyone can move in tomorrow? So I mean, it's just people don't comprehend it, and that's that's why I think it's important to have thought leaders like yourselves just able to comprehend these concepts.
So to answer your question, and maybe you can seed it with these folks, who's going to be taking the video to do a video news release when we get back of, Senator Chang just took 40 people from Hawaii to whatever, and
Good question.
so there's that.
I'm glad you asked.
And then who among these folks is gonna have in their head the idea that maybe they'll write an op-ed or 2 or 3, to appear in all the different
Or an article
venues.
for ULI, or Affordable Housing Magazine, or,
Right.
yeah, I mean,
But your main audience you need to convince is here.
well,
right?
that,
So-
yes, but there's also people who are smart people who are outside of Hawaii as well, who could contribute to this, solving this problem.
Or solve it for their own jurisdiction.
Or solve it for their own jurisdiction. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the more smart people who are thinking about this, whether they're in Hawaii or somewhere on the mainland, the better.
I agree. It sounds like you're volunteering. But back to your comments, Sarah.
I'll write that down.
Actually, one of the people who didn't make it in time, I mean, she just confirmed, is Ashley Nagaoka and her photographer from Hawaii News Now.
Oh, they are gonna come.
Yeah, so they're coming. They'll be with us on at least 2 of the days in Singapore, and then I think they're going to go off on their own and interview people or whatever, tour buildings or whatever. But yeah, so hopefully there will be some media
They may or
exposure.
may not be able to get approval for Hong Kong, so we'll
They're
get into
trying.
cage homes if we can.
I want them to see the cage.
Yeah, we're trying to work on that.
Good.
Under
Okay,
the model
last
that
question.
yes, under the model that you proposed, was the government gonna be charging a lease fee rent to people or just a maintenance fee?
Just a maintenance.
Just
I mean, the government doesn't need to make a return on the land, and the land is zero cost basis anyway. So interestingly, what I did learn is that Singapore, the HDB actually has to buy the land from the government, so the government buys the land from itself. And so the opposition parties are saying, well, why the government should just give the land to HDB, and that can further reduce the price of an HDB flat. Because now the HDB needs to build in that cost, into the sales price of the units. Okay, so, all right. If there are more questions, I'll be around afterwards, but next I want to get